So what just happened here? All right, everybody, come back. So what just happened? Did you all feel what just happened right now? And this is the exciting thing that happens in person that doesn't happen anywhere else. And that's this idea that we're all humans and that we can relate to each other and we can be excited. Thank you, Luke. Apparently this group is okay to talk to each other, and that's fantastic. But just remember this experience, because what happened over COVID was that this didn't happen. And all of a sudden, like, being in this experience, we can actually have this conversation and feel this thing. And in French, it's this je ne sais quoi, this I don't know what it is. But that's what this is. And this thing, if you take nothing else away from my talk, just take this experience of feeling what it's like to connect with humans. My name is Josh LaMar, and if you haven't guessed it, I'm American. My accent is Californian, so I'm gonna just apologize in advance if I say something that sounds like a question and it's actually a statement. I'll just apologize in advance. I'm actually trying to make statements here, and it'll have a question mark when that's there. So part of what I wanted to talk about today was how the world has changed and is in a new place because of COVID. And I've broken out into a framework of physical spaces, mental spaces, digital spaces, and then some perspective shifts on how we can actually reframe what's going on for us. So physical spaces. What happened during COVID, during lockdown? All of a sudden, people are building these home offices, but these are not spaces that people were expecting to work from. So all of a sudden COVID happens, and then we have to start being really creative about using our physical spaces. And spaces that were not intended to be work became work. And you can see that my favorite is the bar cart on the top left. It's a bar cart office. But you can see there's one that's on the toilet, there's one that's on an ironing board. You know, these are we had to be really creative about how we were using physical space. But it was physical space that wasn't intended for work. And so what happened was, as we started being more creative about physical space, we started paying attention to physical space even more. And then we started rating other people's physical spaces. And suddenly we got this window into everyone's intimate personal lives of their apartments, because that's just happened to be where they are. And this is a really interesting thing, I think, because physical spaces are so personal, and yet we have this window into people's lives and our coworkers' lives all of a sudden. It's a very strange thing. And this led to this great resignation that's been happening, where people over time are starting to realize that remote working is a thing, it's not going away, and a lot of their companies are allowing them to work remotely, and now that they've gotten used to it, they don't want to go back to going into the office. And so there's this mass resignation that's starting to happen across the US, and I'm sure around the world too, where people want to have different ways of being. And a lot of, I think, what we learned in the pandemic was that we wanted to be in different ways, in a kind of an existentialist way. And when people are leaving, they also start moving. And there's this great migration that starts happening where people are leaving the big cities to bigger spaces. And it's because we're evaluating how we want to use space in our lives, and having more space becomes really important. And also having space that is around our family and friends. And the UX implication here is really about understanding context, because people are living in new ways in these new spaces, and we're actually kind of blind to what's going on in these spaces. For the researchers in the room, how many of you do in-person ethnographic research? Some of you raised them. Yes, some of you. Missed that. I really missed that. And that's a thing that as people's lives have changed so drastically at home, we really just don't see as much through the context of the window. I should actually do this because it's more like Vogue. But we don't actually see how people are being. And to take it back to the exercise we just went through, y'all like to talk to each other, and y'all like to be able to have that experience of being with each other. And when we're doing research, that happens with people. And when you get that moment where suddenly you're actually able to be vulnerable and you're able to really listen and understand and be open to what people have to say, it creates this new understanding of how we can really like have compassion for humans and start designing solutions to their problems. So this leads us into mental spaces, and mental spaces are actually a really interesting thing as well, because as the physical has shifted, we also have shifted our mental spaces. And we've reevaluated ways of relating to each other, because as we are working through the Zoom lens window, all of a sudden we're evaluating the people in our lives, and these are confluence of things that are happening together all at the same time, where our physical spaces are merging with our work physical space. And then our relationships with our coworkers are also merging and moving into our mental spaces and physical spaces at the same time, let alone also children and pets and partners. And if you've noticed, there's a lot of social norms that have kind of started evolving as we've done this as well. And this is the Zoom wave, which I think is really fun, where we wave at the end of the Zoom call. How many of you do that? Like, it's okay to admit this, right? Like, it's okay, you're in a safe space. I wave at the end of the Zoom call too, and it's because the Zoom call has this really abrupt ending, and people really desire this human connection, and as we are learning how to use new tools, we're also learning how to use them better, and we're craving this connection, and so we wave because it's too abrupt of an ending, and we just want to like be more connected to people. And so as we're reevaluating new ways of relating to people, we're starting to bring in more personal, interpersonal kind of friendship behaviors like waving, because you don't wave at your coworkers at the office, or maybe you do, sometimes people do, but it's more of an interpersonal thing that you do with your friends and family than something that you do with your colleagues. And as we start shifting, this is another way where the merging of the work and life is causing us to start using these more personal behaviors. Also, at the same time, there's this other lens of Zoom fatigue. So as we are spending all of our days working online through this Zoom meeting, it starts to really impact people's mental health, because there's this performance aspect of it where you have to be on. And if you are ever, the researchers in the room know this, you have to be on constantly when you are performing, research. It's this very taxing thing for a lot of people. And all of a sudden, everyone is in this space where they have to be constantly performing. They're dressing up for their jobs. They're worried that if they don't show up like they're there, that their employers can get rid of them. And during the pandemic, this was a really scary time. And it caused a lot of fatigue. And then now your whole day is like meetings on Zoom. Or any other video conferencing platform. Just use it more broadly. So again, mental spaces are all coming together, and this is really causing a lot of pain for people. Of course, the implication here for UX is about finding balance, because it's really hard to be able to work when life is intruding on it. And it's about finding that balance between your working space, your mental space where you're working, and your personal space where you're taking care of yourself. And I'd like to finish now with digital spaces. And I think digital spaces are really interesting, and I probably could do an entire talk on the video conference call. So I'm just going to call this digital spaces, but primarily the video conference call. And it's something that has happened over the course of the pandemic, is that we've actually learned quite a bit about how to innovate really quickly. And there are some early adopters, there's some early things that started working, and as the pandemic went on, the video conference call got a lot better. And it's kind of a breeding ground for innovation, because suddenly the entire world is using video conferencing for work, and if something was bad or it was broken or you felt the pain really, really badly. So one of the things is connection time. How many times, and this is the beginning of the meeting is always the first 10 minutes where everyone's connecting, there's some sort of failure. Haven't we wasted enough time waiting for technology to work? I really think that we have. There's a lot of just low-hanging fruit here. You're on mute. I just want to it happens all the time. Why can't our technology actually understand that I'm trying to talk? there's, you know, there might be ways to design around this. And then I think my favorite thing of the entire pandemic was Lawyer Cat. And if you haven't seen Lawyer Cat, has anyone seen Lawyer Cat? Yeah, okay. My favorite thing of the entire pandemic. Why? Because people are learning how to use new tools, and they're not easy to use. And this is a perfect example of how, as we are adopting new tools across a wide spectrum of people, all of a sudden we get these failures that happen, and it's sad when technology breaks down for us. It's sad when we can't figure it out, because it shouldn't be this difficult. And this low-hanging fruit is really there as a way to help us to make the situations, the experiences that we have through technology better. It's about basics. It's really about usability. It's about reliability. These are like standard things for research, and yet at the same time, it's so important to get the basics right, and it's not sexy. It's pretty boring to be like, we should work on our fundamentals. But you know what? As the pandemic has shown us, we don't have a lot of patience for that. And as you're using a tool more and more, the pain feels stronger and stronger. And the video conferencing app is really the tool that I think that we've all paid the most attention to. There's also another bit of fails that happen, and this is because social norms are also changing. And as we are learning to use these tools, we're trying to make the tools better, and we're also trying to learn how to understand them and like figure out, like, as humans, how do I do this? And then there's these social faux pas that happen. There's another, well, I'm just going to put this photo up, and then I wanted to put other photos, but I'm not going to put them there. But you know, there are a lot of times where inappropriate things happen in the bathroom on a Zoom call, and this is a thing that is indicative of the fact that as a culture and society, we actually don't know how to integrate these tools in our lives. And so as the technology is evolving and getting better, we also have to culturally and socially understand how to integrate these tools into our lives. So it's really about defining what the new social norms are and then adapting to them. And there are lots of other examples of how we are adapting to social norms. As an example, reactions are a thing. So sometimes there are, and I've seen this start happening in multiple platforms where you can raise your hand. Well, you can physically raise your hand, but you can also digitally raise your hand. And so a lot of these social cues are starting to build themselves into the tools, which I find very fascinating, because as we are learning to use the tools, we're also kind of learning how to adapt to them socially. Remote research is here to stay. I think that if we learned one thing across the pandemic, it was that going into it, it was really kind of worrisome of like, oh, our clients were like, oh, I don't know, can we do this online? I think we learned we can do it online. There are a lot of things that we can do online, and actually that's a great thing, because it means that the assumption that doing research in person is kind of gone. But there are some major benefits to doing remote research. And of course, there is one major drawback, and that's what you experienced earlier when you all talked to each other. Because that sense of being in person is still going to be gone. And that sense of interrelating with each other at the same time, physically present as bodies in space, that is a piece that isn't going to be made up by doing remote research. And yet at the same time, we can get a lot broader audience, we can get a segmentation across an entire country. And I think that part of the wave of the future is actually going to be in a hybrid way, where some things are happening in person and some things are happening remotely, and we're taking the best of both worlds. So I wanted to finish with some perspective shifts on the new wave of UX, because as all of these physical spaces, mental spaces, and digital spaces have evolved because of COVID, there are some shifts that I think are happening that I want to encourage us all to continue thinking about. So the first one is this idea of context. The video call window is so limited because you see this much, and in person you see so much more. And I love this particular photo too, because you see the baby play stuff with the office, with the like kind of whiteboard, but there's like other stuff going on. And the reality is that people's lives are actually a bit messier. And you don't see that when you see the curated Zoom lens or the curated Zoom background that has been rated 10 out of 10. And I think that if there's a way to think about how we can actually understand context remotely in a new way, it would be really powerful when we're designing experiences for people to really understand the rest of the room. Communicating to relating is another piece where I can send you a message, like the sender-receiver kind of message communication, like that's a thing that has existed for a while. That's an email, that can be a video call, whatever that is. Communication isn't really the problem here. We can communicate with each other digitally, and we have for a long time, but relating to each other as humans. What about those in-between times of a meeting? A meeting always has a purpose. There's a defined beginning and an end and a purpose, and the people all go into the meeting at the same time, and then what happens? We're able to have that meeting, but then when it's over, you walk to the elevator, you walk to the next meeting, you get a coffee with a coworker, and those conversations aren't really captured here. And those are the places where we're actually relating to each other as humans that are kind of gone. And I wonder how we can potentially find new ways to build in more of this relating, that thing that we did earlier. Remote working is leading to remote collaboration. And this is a space where I think that it's ripe for innovation, because the more we are working remotely, the more we're going to have to collaborate with other people that are remote. And as we are moving into a more hybrid workforce, suddenly what's going to happen is there's always going to be someone that's remote. And that means that we're going to have to incorporate them in new ways. If I go back like 10 years, I was at Microsoft, and if you were on a video, like a conference, you're in the conference room, and then the people on the call never had their video on. They were essentially just listening, and maybe someone has something to say once, but they're pretty much ignored. And that's sad because we're not listening to all the people that have a say in what we're doing. That has really changed, actually. And now, because we know that sense of feeling like we're all in that space, all being remote, all being calling into the call at the same time, there's a lot more compassion for what that experience is like for people. And to really take that to the next level is about how do we actually collaborate in meaningful ways remotely. And I want to really think more about how we can do that, because this is ripe for innovation here. And then reshifting work-life balance to life-work separation. This, if anything, has been a tough year in terms of work and life, and really work taking over life. And when you can't go anywhere else and your friends, family are all in the same boat, it's kind of hard. And as a healthy response, it's important to take care of ourselves, and that means separation. And this myth that life and work are merging, we don't want it to merge. And I think that we collectively learned that separation is really, really good, and turning things off. How can technology help us to separate between work and our lives? And I'm going to leave you with a final question, which is, how will we integrate these new behaviors going forward as we are moving through this? And it's not even a new normal. I can't say new normal because it's changed. The world is in a different place now because of COVID. And how are we going to take these new behaviors that have come up? How are we going to integrate them or assimilate them into what we're doing right now? And that's the question that I think that I want to leave you with, because it might be different for each of you, and it might be different for each of the products that we work on. But having this understanding that the world is new, and how will we make it better? Thank you very much.